All right. So we are recording right now.
Yep, I just said it.
Let's see. So it's been 26 minutes already. We are recording everything. So Hugh, thank you very much for joining, and all guests. I'll give the floor to you, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. So I'd like to open up by saying good morning to everybody, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Hugh Doherty, and I am your chair for this conference on Uyghur forced labor. I am co-chair of CSRDN, which is Canadians in Support of Refugees in Dire Need, and our organization believes that every life is precious, regardless of race, culture, or faith. I'm joined this morning by a panel of legal experts as well as human rights activists and Canadians of Uyghur, Hong Kong, and Tibetan background concerned about forced labor in China. As you know, the use of forced labor is a human rights abuse, and we are asking for an investigation into the Canadian companies who may be profiting from forced labor. We are calling on the Canadian Ombudsman for Responsible Enterprise, CORE, to launch an investigation into China's human rights abuses and forced labor in the Uyghur ethnic community. Our first speaker, a gentleman who I know is our first speaker. It's David Matas. David Matas is immigration, refugee, international human rights lawyer based in Winnipeg. In 2020, he was the first recipient of the Canadians in Support of Refugees in Dire Need Global Humanitarian Leader of the Year Award. David will provide an overview of the Canadian Border Service Agency case. Take it away, David. If you could unmute yourself, David. David? David, you need to unmute yourself. Sorry.
So unmute me. Okay, that was fine. Sorry, originally I couldn't unmute myself, but now obviously I can.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk about this court case. The late David Kilgore, Queen's University law graduate Maria Reisdorf, Aliyah Khan, who's president of the NGO Canadians in Support of Refugees in Dire Need, and Maya Mitalopova, who's president of the Boston Uyghur Association, and we wrote to the Canada Border Services Agency on November 20th, 2020, asking the Government of Canada to prohibit the import of goods produced in Xinjiang in the absence of clear and convincing evidence that those goods had not been produced by forced labor. The Canada Border Services Agency replied that the customs tariff did not provide them the authority to do that, to prohibit or regulate goods for production by forced labor solely on the basis of originating from a specific region or country. They added that establishment of this type of legislation would fall under the purview of Global Affairs Canada. They concluded that determinations are made on a case-by-case basis based on available supporting evidence and analysis. 4 of us, of the 5 that wrote the letter, as applicants, and I, as their lawyer, challenged this communication in federal court by this interpretation by the agency, by an application filed on February 12, 2021. And we argued that the Canada Border Service Agency had, under existing legislation, the legal authority to do what we asked them to do, that legally the agency could, if they wanted, prohibit the import of goods produced in Xinjiang in the absence of clear and convincing evidence that those goods had not been produced by forced labor. The case was argued on December 6th, this past year before Associate Chief Justice Gagné. The application was dismissed on April 5th this year, a few days ago. The court held that the legal interpretation that the Canada Border Services Agency gave that they legally could not do what was requested, which was to prohibit the import of goods produced in Xinjiang in the absence of clear and convincing evidence that those goods had not been produced by forced labor. That legal interpretation was not subject to judicial review. The court further held that the applicants, all of them or none of them, they didn't have the standing to bring the matter before the court. They said that this was so that there was no standing, even though there was no other way to bring the issue before the courts. That issue of whether the agency had the legal authority to do what was requested. Finally, the court held that the interpretation that the Canada Border Service Agency gave of the Customs and Tariff Act was reasonable, that it was reasonable for the agency to conclude that they did not have the legal authority to do what was asked, which was prohibit the import of goods produced in Xinjiang in the absence of clear and convincing evidence that those goods had not been produced by forced labor. This judgment is subject to appeal. The deadline for appeal is May 5th. The applicants, Maria Reisdorf, Canadian supporter of refugees in dire need, and Maya Mitalapova have all given instructions to appeal, so there will be an appeal filed. And that's a brief summary of the case.
Thank you very much, David. Okay. Now, our next speaker is Sarah Teach. Sarah Teach is an international human rights lawyer based in Toronto, Canada. She advises various organizations, including Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, focusing on helping them to utilize domestic, foreign, and international mechanisms to seek justice and accountability for crimes of atrocity and human rights abuses committed by state and non-state actors around the world. She will speak on the core complaint from a legal perspective.
Morning, everyone. Today, we filed a supplemental submission to the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise following our original filing of 10 days ago. On behalf of a coalition of 28 Canadian nonprofit organizations, we are asking the Ombudsperson to launch an investigation into 14 companies for whom there is evidence of Uyghur forced labor in their supply chains. They are Costco, Gap, Hugo Boss, Nike, Ralph Lauren, Zara, Diesel, Guess, Levi Strauss, Walmart, Lululemon, Amazon, Dynasty Gold Corp, and Gobi Mine. For all of these companies, there is evidence that their supply chains use Uyghur forced labor. Forced labor is one of the many crimes and human rights abuses that Uyghurs are subjected to as part of an overall campaign of repression and genocide. This context is important. Combating the forced labor of Uyghurs can be impactful in combating the genocide of this people. The burden is not solely on the Chinese government to not commit genocide and to not commit human rights abuses like use of forced labor. Companies operating in the region have a responsibility to ensure that they are complying with human rights standards. This is the raison d'etre of the Ombudsperson's Office, which was established by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in 2019 to ensure that Canadian companies operating abroad respect human rights. If they do not, and if they are complicit in or responsible for human rights abuses, they can and they should be held accountable. The Ombudsperson's Office became operational in 2021. It was set up specifically to be able to investigate companies' responsibility for human rights abuses that occurred or are occurring abroad. This is what we are asking the Ombudsperson to do. Our first submission to the Ombudsperson was on April 11, and in a 98-page document, we outlined the evidence that these 14 companies have Uyghur forced labor in their supply chains. We also outlined the Ombudsperson's specific admissibility criteria, and we detailed how they are satisfied in this case. Our supplemental submission, which was filed this morning, addressed companies' responses and reiterated the importance of the Ombudsperson launching an investigation. Canada has long been a leader when it comes to human rights advocacy and action on the world stage. If the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise launches an investigation into these companies' use of Uyghur forced labor, this may also set an example for other countries to follow. I'll be happy to answer questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Adrian Zenz. Dr. Adrian Zenz is the Director and Senior Fellow in China Studies at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, Washington. His research focuses on China's ethnic policy, public recruitment in Tibet and Xinjiang, Beijing's internment campaign in Xinjiang, and China's domestic security budgets. Most recently, his work on parent-child separation in Xinjiang prompted The Economist to feature this atrocity on its cover page and to refer to it as a crime against humanity that represents the gravest example of worldwide attack on human rights. We welcome Dr. Zenz, who will speak on China's forced labor policy.
Thank you indeed. Thank you very much. I'll briefly be presenting on systems of forced labor in Xinjiang. Xinjiang operates two distinct but complementary systems of forced labor that together are very large in scale. We can estimate the scale of affected ethnic minority adults at least 2 million, possibly 2.5 million or more. These forced labor systems target Uyghurs and ethnic minorities. They can cause substantial internal displacement through the forcible transfer of civilian populations and can constitute a form of human trafficking. It's important to keep in mind that the main goals of coercive labor in Xinjiang are not just economic but political in nature, a fact that was underlined by internal confidential speeches by President Xi Jinping and other central government figures leaked in 2014. The first forced labor system is directly linked to the internment camps and constitutes a resettling of former camp detainees into forced labor, often in factory parks nearby. Xinjiang government documents have admitted and directly stated that this constitutes an important aspect of Xinjiang's economy and employment. Forced labor is also linked to poverty elevation through labor transfers. Through this, so-called rural surplus laborers are transferred from the agricultural sector to other sectors. This system has existed since the 2000s, but in the wake of Xi Jinping's targeted poverty elevation and in the wake of the shift of political priorities from economic development to de-extremification in 2014, which paved the way for the severe crackdown that we are now seeing in the region, these systems became considerably more coercive. Their implementation coincided then with the onset of the campaign of mass internment in 2017. The transfer of laborers through poverty elevation affects entire sectors in industry, such as the picking of cotton, the picking of tomatoes, the processing of tomatoes and other agricultural products, the production of polysilicon for solar panels, and generally it affects many low-skilled labor-intensive manufacturing sectors in the industry. I have estimated that up to 1.6 million ethnic citizens in Xinjiang could be at risk of forced labor, specifically through labor transfer. In addition, labor transfers can displace Uyghurs substantially by transferring them to other parts of the region or to other provinces at a smaller extent. In this context, labor transfers, coercive labor through labor transfers, is part of a so-called population optimization strategy by which the state is altering the ethnic population structure, trying to dilute ethnic communities, moving in Han, moving Uyghurs out for labor, breaking up traditional community patterns, and cutting off the intergenerational transmission of culture, of religion, of language. Labor transfers are often facilitated by separating children from parents, putting them in full-time boarding schools. Parents may then be transferred to factories and factory compounds. Women are often put into labor in satellite factories nearby. This is all supported by a system called Xinjiang Aid or pairing assistance, mutual pairing assistance, whereby provinces and cities in eastern China invest billions into factories in Xinjiang itself. Some of this directly funds factories linked to internment camps, and others finances factory parks that are linked to poverty elevation through labor transfer. A legal assessment has found that there are credible reasons to assume that Xinjiang's labor transfer policies constitute or could constitute a crime against humanity of forcible transfer, which refers to the removal of civilians from a place where they're lawfully present without their consent, violating the protected interests and rights of persons to live in their communities and homes. These practices also indirectly or directly feed into determinations and understandings that the crimes and the actions of the Chinese state in the region could constitute a genocide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Next, we will have Mehmet Toti speak on the current situation. Mehmet Toti is a prominent Uyghur Canadian activist campaigning for the rights of Uyghurs for over a decade. He is no stranger to the issue, and he is a co-founder of the World Uyghur Congress and has twice served as vice president. He is executive director of the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project based in Ottawa.
Thank you, Hugh, and thank you, everyone. And as we know, Canada has made a number of public announcements aiming to address the mounting crisis of Uyghur forced labor products entering Canada and poisoning our consumer market. And a first announcement by Global Affairs of Canada made on January 12, 2021. In that advisory, the Government of Canada asked the Canadian companies to exercise due diligence in their business practices with China. And later on, during the G7 last year held in UK, our Prime Minister committed with other G7 leaders to clean up the global market from the products tainted by the use of Uyghur forced labor. And we know that parliamentary recommendations also stressed out this issue, and the global campaigns of NGOs all across the world urging respective governments to take action to address this dire situation. And mostly it has remained unanswered. Only there are steps taken by United States of America, and there is no visible steps yet taken in any other Western democracies. Meanwhile, government of China has continued and still is continuing to transfer a massive number of Uyghurs as a slave labor in many parts of Chinese cities and towns in mainland China by displacing them from their roots and from their families and homes. As many independent reports and leaked Chinese documents already expose the scale and the scope of Uyghur forced labor, Chinese government did not even imply to slow down or reverse its ongoing policy. As we speak right now, the Uyghurs are being used as slave laborers in tomato, cotton, garment, electronics, mining, and the energy sectors, and of course to produce daily consumer items that we are using every day in Canada and around the world. Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project, on behalf of dozens of other concerned NGOs across the country, we express our deep disappointment and frustration on the current stand of our government to address this issue. As an independent watchdog institution mandated to look after Canadian companies' compliance with human rights norms around the world, and the Corps' mission to deal with this case is extremely vital, and we expect the Corps to complete this investigation to the fullest extent and share its findings with the public as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mehmet. Our next speaker is Gloria Fung, who is the president of Canada-Hong Kong Link and has helped coordinate exchange activities between Canada and Hong Kong. In 2015, she was involved in successful lobbying of the Standing Committee of Foreign Affairs and International Development to conduct a parliamentary study on the democratic future of Hong Kong, which led to public statements supporting Hong Kong being issued by the House of Commons and the Foreign Affairs Minister. Gloria will speak on the World Bank experience on forced labor.
Thank you very much for having me today to share my observation and experience in the Eastern Turkestan region in the People's Republic of China. I manage internationally financed agricultural projects in China from 1984 to 1989. I was engaged in the World Bank Xinjiang Agricultural Development Project of the General Bureau of State Farms under the Ministry of Agriculture. This Xinjiang General Bureau of State Farm has a different name in Chinese, which literally means Xinjiang Production and Construction Military Troop, which truly reflects the true nature of it being the Liberation Army stationing in the region. During that time, my responsibility in the World Bank project involved two areas. Number one, the mechanization of state farms by conducting feasibility study with John Deere's technical expertise, and also the supply of John Deere's agricultural machinery. Number two, the development of a special cotton picker that complies with the special specification of the region. Because of my involvement in the project, I travel very extensively to different sites in the region, from Kuju, Akasu, Kashi in southern Xinjiang, and from Urumqi, Sihezi, all the way to Yiling in the north, and all the way to the border between China and Soviet Union. And also I had access to areas that are forbidden to journalists and also outsiders. Even in the late 80s, I sense a very tense atmosphere as I enter into the region. I had exactly the same feeling when I traveled to Tibet region. And there were security guards and Liberation Army soldiers everywhere. In terms of economic, social, and political status, there was a two-tier society in the region. The Han Chinese from other parts of China were in control of all government departments to state enterprises covering agricultural processing plants, industrial factories, department stores, to big and small hotels, where the Uyghur people occupied the lowly paid operational positions. I never saw a single Uyghur staff in the management nor finance offices of the state farms. Uyghur Muslims lived in the poorest sections of the towns or villages. In Kashi, as well as other parts of the East Turkestan region, I always saw young Uyghurs idling on the streets all day long. They did not have the chance to go to school, nor did they have any jobs. They told me that they were forced to learn Chinese only and described their education as brainwashing. They were taught nothing of their own language, culture, and history. The East Turkestan region produces the world's famous long grain cotton, and cotton was picked by hand historically in that region. And that was one of the toughest jobs in the field, as you get hurt very easily by the cotton spice. When I conducted the technical feasibility study with John Deere technical experts at the fields, I observed that majority of the workers at the field were Uyghur people, both men and women, all under close monitoring of security guards. They were not allowed to talk to us. Based on my experience in China, they were mostly forced labor from labor camps in the region. And I had seen similar situation in northeastern wheat belt in Heilongjiang province, which was another major location for labor camps where political detainees purged in various political movements were locked up there and forced to work in the state farms. The genocide policy of the Uyghur Muslim people in the East Turkestan region dated back to the time when the Chinese Communist Party unlawfully occupied the region in late 1940s. Because the international community has been showing a blind eye to the human rights abuses in the region, China has aggravated its brutal crackdown there. Coming to an international recognition that there is genocide in the East Turkestan region is a big leap forward. However, it would not create any meaningful impact if our sanctioning and ban forced labor product policy is not fully followed through by our Canadian government and private sector. Therefore, as Canada Hong Kong Link, we fully support the demands for investigation of Canadian companies profiting from forced labor in China. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gloria. Our next speaker is Sherab Thirchin, who will speak on Tibetan forced labor trend. Sherab Thirchin joined the Canada-Tibet Committee in January 2018 as its executive director. He was born and grew up in Tibetan refugee communities in Nepal and came to Canada in 2015. Thank you, Sherab.
Thank you, Hugh. I'm here today representing the Canada-Tibet Committee, sharing solidarity with my Uyghur friends as member of the nation being oppressed by the same regime since 1949. And I'm here today to urge Canadian government to give a meaning to the parliamentary motion that declared the treatment of Uyghurs as genocide. Thanks to some excellent reports from Dr. Adrian Zenz, who's here with us today, and other researchers and activists, the world now knows and agree that there's a gross human rights violation happening in East Turkestan, Tibet, Hong Kong, and other regions in China. By now, we know what kind of leader Xi Jinping is, what kind of government the CCP is. If anyone still have any doubt or the feeling of being away from all that is happening, then one can always look at the event of 2 Michaels. So now the time is to urge for actions, to ask government, parliament, civil society, media, and the corporates on what actions have we taken to address this 21st century genocide. While we are very, as a advocacy group, we are very thankful and grateful for the creation of Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise in 2018. This important government body, without the power and independence to actually investigate our complaints, would be meaningless. Of many limitations that CORE deal with, the key limitation for CORE concerning Tibet would be the access for Tibetans to come to Canada and provide testimony on their forced labor experience, and the access for Canadian diplomats to have unrestricted and independent access to Tibet. I stress the use of the words unrestricted and independent because the last time Canadian diplomat, Ambassador Dominic Burton, visited Tibet, it was not unrestricted and independent. It was highly orchestrated, state-sponsored trip that didn't allow any opportunity to monitor human rights situation. The access for Tibetans to come to Canada because almost no passports have been issued to ordinary Tibetans since 2012. In the same period, the number of passports issued to Chinese nationals increased by 20% each year.
Oh, Adrian.
And for those Tibetans who have managed to obtain travel documents, there's strict regulation on their activities outside of China and are required to report for questioning upon their return to Tibet. As for Canadian companies working in Tibet, a research by the Canada-Tibet Committee in 2012 identified 36 Canadian companies that had invested in Tibet since 1999. Of this, 21 were mining companies, while others provided construction services and materials. None of the companies had conducted due diligence to assess human rights risk in project areas, nor had they received information about human rights sensitivities in Tibet from Canada's Trade Commissioner or embassy staff in Beijing. Several company spokespeople claim to be unaware of any potential sensitivity in Tibet. At least 20 of the companies surveyed were the target of human rights campaigns at some point during the history of their investment. Most ignored the campaigns, while two of those companies threatened lawsuits against the Canada-Tibet Committee and others who campaigned. And one responded by funding a tour guide training program for 20 Tibetans. By 2017, virtually all investors identified had abandoned their investment or sold their interest to Chinese companies, citing logistic obstacles, difficulty obtaining needed licenses, or rampant corruption of local officials. So today, the so-called Canadian companies in Tibet are likely to be Chinese companies, often state-owned, that have registered in Canada to access capital or other benefits, but who do not subscribe to Canadian human rights values. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheriff. Enes Kanter Freedom is an American professional basketball player and activist. He has been a vocal activist against China's treatment of the Uyghur, Tibet, Taiwan, and Hong Kong communities, encouraging his fellow athletes to stand up strong and raise awareness of China's human rights abuses, especially the internment and forced labor of the Uyghurs. He is a man of integrity, conscience, and principles. He is exactly the person we want to stand beside. As a matter of fact, personally, I've lived a long enough life to be able to see what the likes of Muhammad Ali, who everybody underestimated, was able to say in defense of people. And I see this gentleman going the same route, and I am happy to have him on this forum. Go ahead, sir.
Unmute.
Perfect. First of all, thank you guys for inviting me. I'm really honored and humbled to be here. You know, it gives me so much hope when I see, you know, important people like you guys. It gives me so much hope and motivation to fight for what's right. So it's been amazing. This meeting definitely has been amazing. You know, I wanted to talk about how I started to you know, talk about all the abuses over there in China, because it has a very special story. You know, I was doing a basketball camp this past summer for young kids, and after the basketball camp, right, I sit down and I was taking a picture with the kids one by one. While I was taking a picture, I remember this kid came to me and took a picture, and his parents called me out in front of everybody and said, "How can you call yourself a human rights activist when your Muslim brothers and sisters are getting tortured and raped every day in concentration camps in China?" I remember hearing those words, and I turned around. I was shocked. I couldn't say anything. I was like, I looked at him for a moment, and I said, "I promise I'm going to get back to you." Well, the reason I have not said anything, because the last 10 years I was only focusing the dictatorship in Turkey, because obviously my family was involved in it, you know. So that day I canceled everything. I went back to my hotel and I started to study about what is happening over there. You know, I started to study, and then the things that I have seen, I was really ashamed with myself. I was like, I cannot believe the last 10 years I was only focused on one dictatorship. So anyway, and then you know, the more I studied, you know, I started with Uyghurs. Then obviously I was a really big fan of Dalai Lama, and I, you know, started to, you know, study about Tibetans and Hong Kongs, obviously. And then I always wanted to go to Taiwan, and then I started to study about Taiwan. And you know, on internet you can find all kind of news, fake news, not fake news, good news, bad news. So I asked my manager to find me a concentration camp survivor. Obviously he was very shocked the first time he heard it. So he found me one, and we sit down and had a conversation. You know, the things that she told me that day, you know, she explained to me about what is happening over there, what is really happening in concentration camps. I was shocked. I was like, I don't care how much money or how much business is involved. If a human being carries a heart, you have to stand up for those people. And obviously, I started to talk about this innocent people over there, you know, Tibetans and Uyghurs and Hong Kongers and Mongolis and Taiwanese. And I wanted to do it in a very colorful way. So I created the shoes. I put these, phrases on my shoes and went out there and play. And obviously, when you do that, when billions of dollars involved, not many of the companies or organizations going to like it. But it is important, very important, to stand up for those innocent people because they need our help. And we always say, don't just talk about it, be about it. It is important to just obviously, first of all, bring awareness about what's going on over there. We need to, first of all, amplify and, bring, light to all this abuses over there, one. And two, we need to come up with ideas. How can we help those people? I remember talking to that lady, the concentration camp survivor. At the end of our conversation, I asked her, how can I help you? She said, I'm good. I was like, what do you mean? She said, I'm in America. I'm safe. I'm good. But there are over 2 million people are in concentration camps right now, are getting tortured and raped every day. Help those people. So I was like, I'm gonna do whatever I can to, just bring light. So I mean, I think this is a very, important meeting because we have so many brilliant minds. We need to come up with some ideas to help those people. I think if we just have a meeting and just talk about it, it's amazing. It brings awareness, but I feel like we need to come up with more ideas of how can we help, how can we help them. But other than that, thank you guys for inviting me. I hope that I can play in NBA, so I can invite you guys to one of my games. So it's an honor to be here with you guys, and I'm really thrilled. But thank you guys for inviting me.
Well, I thank you so much. And I thank all our speakers because I am privileged to be in the company of such humanitarian minds and such terrific human beings at such a learned company. I thank you so much for presenting for us today. And it gives me hope. I haven't had a lot of that in the last couple of years with some things that have been going on in the world, but we will keep fighting, and we will keep bringing people's attention to what's going on. Of course, companies, they have the choice. They make decisions based on what their needs are, what their priorities are, and governments do the same thing.
Exactly.
The bottom line is that at the end of the day, we as citizens or as consumers, we can make our choices too. And maybe our choices can be heard and around the world. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I am now going to open it up for any questions. Okay. Are there any questions?
Yes, I'd like to ask Enes, merhabalar. Why would you think that there's not much interest among sport athletes towards particular Chinese, the Uyghur genocide, and there is much happening right now in the world of sports, in the attitude and the general, how would I say, outrage among athletes towards Russian aggression in Ukraine, but how somehow it's been sidelined what is happening in China. What's your take on that? Thank you.
So I'll give you an example. NBA, right? There are more people last year watched NBA game in China than American population. It's a $5 billion with the B, $5 billion of business, right? NBA always say, the commissioner always say, we encourage our players to talk about whatever they want to talk about, whatever happens. We have to stand with our players, right? So that's what they say. Last 10 years, I talk about the problems are happening in my home country, Turkey. I did not get one phone call. I did not get one complaint. I talk about the problems are happening in China. One day, my phone was ringing once every hour. It is so crazy how these American-made organizations, associations, and companies, when it comes to China, it's just unbelievable how much they scared, and that the players knows that. I mean, I started to talk about these issues right before the Winter Olympics, right? I tried to reach out to many Olympians, many athletes, and not just in the basketball world, other organizations, other associations. And this is exactly what they said. Listen, Enes, I think what you're doing is so amazing, so courageous. Keep doing what you're doing. We love you, we support you, but we just cannot do it out loud. I asked them why. They said, well, we have shoe deals, we have endorsement deals, we have family to feed, we want to get another contract. So that is so important. This kind of meetings are so important because it is important for us to learn from each other, and also we can go out there and educate and also inspire our young generation. So when they become in our age, they won't face the same problems we are facing right now. You know, but unfortunately, there are many well, I don't want to say many, but all of them are picking money over morals, principles, and values. But I always ask him one question. You know, I say, if your mother, if your daughter, or if your sister was in those concentration camps right now getting tortured and raped every day, would you still remain silent? Not one of them answers. So.
True. So is there anybody else with any other questions? Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today.
Can I ask a quick question to Enes, please?
Certainly.
Enes, first of all, thank you so much, because I have been a fan of NBA for a long time, and I've always sensed, being a big fan of LeBron James, I couldn't help but sense a hypocrisy in him, and many other big stars who claim to be, speaking for a cause.
Right.
And I always remember the former Golden State Warrior player, Andrew Bogut, saying, it's all about the cause until it's about cost.
Yep.
And that happens to be so true with LeBron James. And I've been following your activism. You're speaking out for our cause, for Uyghur cause. And there's always sense of some kind of not direct, but indirect opposition from big stars like LeBron James. So I'm just wondering, how can, is there anything that we as a common man, activists and NBA fans can do to push people like LeBron James to to speak out and come out of that comfort zone?
I mean, first of all, like I said again, I think we need to change our mindset of our young generation. If you want to have a better and brighter future, we have to change our the mind of the young generation. The second thing is, unfortunately, those superstars, I will say, or sports superstars, are fake, are phony. They will stand up everything. They will stand for the causes that won't affect their money or business or pocket or, So, I mean, I feel like the more meetings like this, I think that the social media and, the more reporters that push them to ask them questions, that is the least we can do, I think it only starts with us, and then how we are affecting our family, then our community, our neighborhood, and then our city and stuff. But it just those people are just the one that really frustrates me, because there are millions of kids out there are watching and idolizing their footsteps, and they're a role model, and they do see the hypocrisy, because they see they're standing up for everything, but when it comes to one specific topic, China, one specific country, they're dead silence, unfortunately. But I think that the least we can do, you might not change the world, but you might change someone's world. So I feel like we need to start with our community and then go from there. But I think like the past legislations or push our policymakers is important. As you know, we passed a legislation, the Uyghur Force Prevention Act. You know, that is going to cost China and some of the companies billions of dollars. You know, I think that and also the least you can do. You know, people keep asking me, well, I don't have an MBA platform, I don't have this and that. I feel like the least you can do when you're about to buy an item, when you see made in China, put it down. That's the least you can do.
Mhm. Thank you, Enes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Enes. And on that note, you know, when I was raising my children, I would tell them to look to this person, look to that man, look to this woman, you know, as heroes. And I have to admit, I wasn't a big sports guy, still not, but I would tell them to look to the likes of Muhammad Ali, who was a big boxer, and but you know, at one point, Muhammad Ali gave up his championship in view of his principles. He went to the Supreme Court and he won against the government of the United States with regards to being able to live his faith and by his principles. And you are living your life by your principles, and you have made that choice with regards to whether it's the dollar or whether it's the principles. And China, being a so-called communist country, being driven by money, is just an oxymoron. You know, it's just, it can't claim that title anymore. It never claimed the title of human rights, and it's putting the world to shame, and doing it with too much muscle because we give it to them. We give them too much of a platform. So I thank you for speaking today. I thank everyone else for all the work that you do. And in that vein, unless we have any other questions, we're going to conclude the meeting.
Thank you very much. And I'm recording all this. It will be posted on YouTube. Thank you once again for all participants and their time.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time today.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.